Same to you. So let's get to work, everyone. First of all, my name is Jim Manico. I'm one of the board members of the OWASP Foundation. One of the principles of OWASP that is very important to me, OWASP is vendor neutral, and we don't endorse any commercial company. That goes for my company as well. OWASP does not endorse what I do commercially, and just for the sake of giving good material, I'm using one of my commercial decks. So I don't want you to mistake OWASP from my company. They are separate and different things, and OWASP does not endorse what I do. I think that's important. Okay, let's get to work here. Hi, I'm Jim, but who cares? Hopefully what I say to you is going to be of value to you in some way. Here's a warning. Please don't hack any computer system without legal permission to do so. Yeah, I know. So let's get to this. We're going to talk about the OAuth framework. We're going to talk about and what's delegation and what does OAuth actually do. We'll look at some cross-site request forgery issues around OAuth. We'll take a look at different redirection problems. We'll look at different token use attacks, as well as, and the main focus of this presentation is, we'll look at some of the key OAuth grant types and understand what this protocol is and what it's about, right? First of all, who here knows what OAuth is and has a good understanding of why OAuth is used? Who is OAuth a new topic for? Who is this new for? Who here didn't raise their hand and is not paying attention to my questions? All right, that's okay. That's okay. So this is a relatively introductory talk, but this is a very complicated topic, and I'll be happy to answer more detailed questions at the end. Let's get to it. So first of all, what should OAuth not be used for? And it should not be used for traditional access control. You're never going to replace role-based access control or capabilities access control with the OAuth protocol or framework, and more accurately. It shouldn't be used for authentication by itself. If you really need to use OAuth with authentication, you should be looking at different extensions to OAuth like OIDC, like the OpenID Connect. But by itself, it is not used, it should not be used for authentication, and a lot of people do this. That's called pseudo-authentication, fake authentication, and it's very problematic from a security point of view. OAuth should also not be used for the federation of authentication. That's what SAML is for. So the biggest problem is, let's use OAuth for its purpose, and that's for the delegation of different resource privileges. And it's very similar to authorization. It's similar to access control, but it's not. So we're going to explain what all these terms mean. This is, again, a relatively complicated protocol. So again, what is OAuth? Let's go back to that. OAuth is an authentication. This is just what Twitter says now, and it's not even accurate, but it's close. It's an authentication protocol that allows users to approve applications to act on their behalf without sharing their password. We're getting close now. The word authentication is not accurate. The real word technically is going to be delegation. We're not going to use OAuth by itself to log in. That's a separate use. So again, why I'm showing this is because there's a lot of confusion about what this protocol or framework is all about. Let's try it again. What's OAuth? OAuth is like a valet key, right? Now, what's a valet key? Any of you drive a nice Mercedes or a nice car? My computer is worth more than my car. That's the way I go. Who has like a Mercedes, or if you really like good cars, you know, the only really good car, a Ferrari, of course, from the Italians, right? Who here drives a fancy car? Anyone? Anyone? So when you get and I don't have a fancy car, believe me. You get two keys. You get one key to start the engine, to open the trunk, and to open the glove compartment. That's your standard car key. But fancy cars are you're also given a valet key. So if you go to some fancy restaurant, you give this valet key to the valet, and that key cannot get into your trunk. That key cannot open your glove compartment. It only starts the car and lets the valet park your car. This is what OAuth is. It provides another domain, your valet, the ability to do some privileges, just start the car, not open the other compartments, and you delegate that key to that valet. This is closer in terms of what OAuth is. And so now let's talk about the different versions of this protocol. The individual who's one of the main founders of OAuth One of the is Aaron Hammer. And we're going to look at the history of OAuth in just a moment. And the main standard in use today is OAuth 2.0. And OAuth 2.0, at the hands of a developer with deep understanding of web security, will likely result in a secure implementation. Who here works with developers? How many developers do you work with that have a deep, intimate, close relationship, like the love of a good woman, with secure web security programming techniques? How many here can say, I work with developers who are fantastic at web security? Anyone? 1, 2 out of 100. That's the problem. So let me ask you this. When you grab your average web developer and ask them about web security, how do they do today? Overall, Martin? At best. Normally the answer is they have no fucking clue what they're doing. That's the normal answer. But we're entering an era where now more and more developers get web security, but it's still rare. Timur, am I allowed to swear? Probably not, right? It's a hacking conference. Come on, Timur. Don't be so conservative. Come on. Gotta watch this guy. And so he's right. The problem is OAuth 2. It's a simple, it's a, to some degree, a basic framework. But almost everything that comes, almost everything around security in OAuth 2.0, you have to do it yourself. The framework doesn't address this. They say you figure that one out, which is a major problem, especially for companies who don't have a lot of developers like Google or Twitter does. Google could just throw a bunch of PhDs at it and they'll figure it out. How many here have a plethora, a lot of extra PhD level developers with web security experience to work on your OAuth server? That's almost nobody. That's the problem. So let's look at the history of OAuth. Back in November of 2006, we have Blaine Cook. Blaine Cook was working at Twitter. He had the problem of delegation. Another company wanted to tweet on behalf of Twitter users even when Twitter users were not logged into their website. This is a very common thing we see today. So you ever go to a website and they're like, hey, would you like to enter in your Twitter account here? So you log into that website, you put in your Twitter handle, they redirect you back to Twitter, you log into Twitter, they redirect you back to your website, and now your website is allowed to tweet on your behalf. That was the problem that Blaine was working on in November 2006, and there was nothing at all in all of computer programming that addressed this kind of delegation to different third parties. So then Magnolia and Google and other major players joined the discussion, and they formed the OAuth working group. And also that year, Aaron Hammer, who was the lead of the OAuth specification, he joined OAuth as well. By the end of that year, in December 2007, the OAuth I final draft was published, a delegation protocol. And then by 2008, Google was now supporting OAuth I across their major services. By 2010, Twitter forced all third-party applications to use OAuth I and dropped all other support. Now, then we begin to do OAuth 2.0. Working group begins to form. And what happened was OAuth 1, it was a relatively simple one workflow protocol based in cryptography. But none of the enterprises liked this. So around 2010, all these Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, all these big enterprises joined the framework and made it and changed the protocol dramatically and made it weaker in many ways, but easier to use. Just June of 2012, Aaron, he rage quits OAuth 2. I love it when security people rage quit things. They do it with style, right? So he very loudly in blog posts and in public conferences, he condemned the OAuth working group, left, and never looked back, and said, you guys are fools. You're just doing this for the enterprise. You're missing good security. As we say in Italian, "Vaffanculo to you," and he left. Very angry, right? And so now we have October of 2012, other enterprise players took over this framework, and we see OAuth 2 published, which leaves us to where we are today. And then 2013, 14, and 15, we realize that the OAuth 2 framework is missing security. So we see all these publications come in now. We have the OAuth threat model, OAuth bearer token standard, OAuth II cryptographic extensions, and all these things that we ripped out of OAuth I are now put back into OAuth II as secondary standards on top of the core framework. Let's look at that. Here's the main difference between OAuth I and OAuth II. OAuth I is founded in the whole concept of cryptography and digital signatures to provide integrity in the message. So what this means is that if you send a message, an OAuth I message back and forth, it's going to be cryptographically signed by each party, which stops tampering and provides other cryptographic benefits. So this was incredibly strong. This is one of the first protocols at this level with crypto built in from the core up. But suppose we're doing digital signature cryptography and now we want to be interoperable between all these different languages. How easy is it to build cryptographic solutions, even something as simple as digital signatures, across 10 different languages? What do you think? It's incredibly difficult. It takes work to provide that compatibility. So although OAuth I was incredibly secure, it was very difficult for implementers, for client implementers, to do cryptography properly. And it became slow for some to implement. And so that's why OAuth II changed so much. OAuth II is no longer based in cryptography. It's now all based in a bearer token. What's the difference between doing digital signatures and using bearer tokens? Just a simple token with token values. Well, cryptography, you can't modify anything. A bearer token is just like a text file. You can change all the variables in it, and there's no integrity built in the core framework. So it's easier to use. It's more interoperable. We can implement it in libraries quickly, but there goes the core of security. There goes the basic integrity that we get from digital signatures and other cryptographic methods. And so what do we depend on in OAuth II to be secure? We depend upon HTTPS and TLS. And how good has HTTPS and TLS been the last couple of years? It's crap. Now, it's better in the last year or two, but especially back 3, 4, 5 years ago, you could go grab Moxie Marlinspike's SSL strip and be cracking HTTPS relatively easily. So those who are deep into security knew that this framework is incredibly weak and we have problems here. So that's where we are about 2013. And this is the main difference. Do you want to depend upon real digital signature security, which is very strong and robust but hard to implement? Or do you want to depend upon a bearer token, which anyone steals that token, they can replay it, change it, and all these other problems we have with simple technology like that. So that's the debate going on, and that's where we are at about 2013. And so again, it's digital signatures versus bearer tokens, and let's just charge on here. So which one should you be using today? If you're a company and you're a developer and you're about to build an OWASP solution to provide delegation, which one should you be using today? And let me take a step back and just explain this workflow one more time. Suppose we have an e-commerce site. I'm going to do a new e-commerce site. What should we sell? Glenn, help me out here. I need an e-commerce website, right? What should we sell? What's that? I'm sorry? We're going Jim's Hawaii T-shirts, right? But now you have to log into my website and make an account. I'll make you a deal though. If you give me on Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts, if you give me your Twitter account and let me tweet for you, even when you're not logged in. So, because you may make an order today, and then you finish the order. Then I'm going to process your credit card. I'm going to build the order. I'm going to ship it to you. And once the shipping is complete, I'll tweet, hey, I just ordered Jim's Hawaiian shirts. They just shipped from Hawaii today. But that might happen in a couple days. You make the order today, but I want to tweet in your behalf like 2 days from now when the shipping goes out to announce that it's on the way to the whole world. And if you do that, I'll give you a 20% discount if you let me tweet on your behalf about the shirts only. That's the whole purpose of this. Now, how are we going to do that? Will you mind just giving me your Twitter password so Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts can just log on for you and tweet on your behalf? How do you like that idea? Just give me your Twitter password. You can trust me. I'm a good Hawaiian guy, right? Do you want to give me your Twitter password? Absolutely not. You should be saying no way, right? And so how am I going to tweet on your behalf when you're not logged in without you giving me a password. That's what OAuth is all about. So you go to Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts, you give me your Twitter handle, I'm going to redirect you to Twitter. And we have a Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts already registered with Twitter as an OAuth client. So now, when you come to Jim's Hawaiian Shirts, I'm going to redirect you to Twitter. You're going to log into Twitter, accept that Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts may tweet on your behalf, accept it. It will redirect you back to my website, Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts, and now I have an OAuth token that lets me tweet on your behalf without needing your password. That's the main use of OAuth. So Google moved away from OAuth I back in April of 2012, and they standardized on OAuth II from that point on. Twitter, to this day, still supports OAuth I. Twitter likes cryptography. Google, they're more like wimps. So, and it's also rare for new server implementations to use OAuth I. Even though Twitter does it, we almost never see anybody do it. So the thing is, there's plenty of OAuth II add-on standards to bring cryptography back in if you want to, even though it's not part of the core specification. So really, for 2015, almost all of us should be using OAuth II for this purpose, unfortunately, because support for OAuth I is fading. And there are ways to do it in a secure fashion. It's a lot of work, but it's difficult. OAuth I has only one workflow. It's relatively complex. I'm not even going to go over it. It involves digital signatures and storing private keys and all that fun stuff. OAuth II overall is a simpler workflow, and there's many different workflows within the OAuth protocol. We'll look at that in just a moment. But the idea is, again, when we say consumer, we're thinking of like Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts. When we look at the service provider, we're thinking of Twitter or Google. So again, the consumer is Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts. You start there. You log into the T-shirt company, you make a purchase, you set up an account, and then when you put in your Twitter handle, you get redirected to Twitter. You log into Twitter. Twitter accepts your login, redirects you back to Jim's Hawaiian T-shirts, and then not between me and Twitter, but between my server and Twitter, they exchange access tokens, which they exchange an access token, which now lets the Hawaiian T-shirt company tweet on behalf of Twitter. So this is, again, this is why it's not authentication. It's not completely access control. It's a kind of security technology called delegation, and there was no such standard that implemented this even just a few years ago. So this is still a relatively new protocol even today. Now, for all the problems of OAuth II, which we'll look at in just a moment, there's not a lot of major incidents of OAuth II servers going bad. In fact, there's very few, because the major OAuth II implementations are from giant companies like Google, like Twitter, like DigitalOcean, a big hosting company, and they can throw tons and tons of resources at it to make it secure, where smaller companies usually do not have the resources to build these solutions in a secure fashion. As we're going to see, there are tons of things that can go wrong when building OAuth solutions. So again, I already have mentioned this workflow several times. I'm going to skip this slide just to move on. Again, you're the Hawaiian T-shirt or some other company, and you are allowing that website to tweet on your behalf, even when you're not logged in, without giving up your password along the way. So let's look at some high-level concepts. Let's dig a little bit deeper, right? First of all, we have different roles in OAuth. And let's go back to the Hawaiian T-shirt company and Twitter as our two examples. Twitter is going to be the service provider, and the Hawaiian T-shirt company is the client, or the consumer in this case. So different roles. We have the resource owner, that would be Twitter. The resource server, that's again like Twitter's authorization server. The client app, that would be the Hawaiian T-shirt company. And you have the authorization server. That's back to Twitter. Also, the resource owner, that would be the user. The resource server, that would be Twitter. Client app, that'd be the Hawaiian T-shirt company. And the authorization server would also be Twitter. So what OAuth II did was they split out how to protect a resource and how to provide an access token. So you can have one authorization server that handles tons of different websites in certain cases as well. So they really decoupled this standard into different pieces, which is very friendly to the enterprise, but not so friendly to a startup who wants to get this done quickly. So OAuth grant types. When OAuth 1 was for the web only. This is another reason why you shouldn't be using OAuth 1 so much anymore. OAuth 1 was made for web applications. So if I have a delegation standard for web applications only, what's the problem? The world is not about web apps anymore. It's about web apps and mobile. And now a big push to native applications is happening as well. So OAuth 2 has 4 different workflows. They have the authorization code workflow, primarily for web apps. They have the implicit workflow, which is to not expose the token to the client at all. We'll look at that. We're going to skip that, but it's another option. You have the resource owner password credential workflow. That's like when you have a trusted third-party client, like the Twitter app. If you download Twitter's official app, they'll have you log into it, and they'll save an access token in it because it's a trusted app from Twitter. We also have the client credentials workflow. That's when you want your server to be reading data from a client that's not specific to any user, right? And so you have all these different workflows to handle all these different situations. There's also an extension grant to support SAML and other protocols on top of OAuth. So in fact, OIDC, OpenID Connect, which I'm very fond of, it uses the extension grant to some degree to accomplish its goals. I'm not going to talk about it in this talk, but OpenIDC Connect, that's an entire layer on top of OAuth 2.0. And let's look at the different tokens. You have an access token. If I have an access token, I give it to the resource server, and it gives me access. We also have a refresh token. The refresh token does not provide access. It just lets me request a new access token, a little bit of indirection there. And then we have the different endpoints we talked about already. A couple terms here. Again, the resource owner, that's the user in play here, the person who both owns the Twitter account and owns the Twitter account and owns the Hawaiian T-shirt account, same person. We have the resource server and the service provider. That's again going to be Twitter or some kind of major provider. We have the authorization server. Again, there's a big decoupling between the portion of the server that gives you access and gives you access tokens and the portion of the server that actually delivers the resource. When I say client consumer, we're talking about, again, primarily the Hawaiian T-shirt company in this scenario. So here's again all these different terms you want to master as well. And by the way, this presentation, I'm going to give you a copy of it. I know this isn't as an exciting of a talk as new things, but this is supposed to be a resource to help you work with this protocol. You'll all get a copy of this given to the conference. Access tokens provide you direct access to a resource. Refresh tokens will let you request new access tokens. So I can store a token in my client that by itself does not provide access. And if you're really doing this correctly, then I can store a refresh token inside of the client, and if someone steals it and tries to use it, the server should recognize that this token is not coming from an approved client server, and it should be ignored. It should only come from a trusted server. So part of your job is to do very strong authentication between the client server and the resource server. And guess what OAuth 2 says about how to do that? So again, you have the client server, Hawaiian T-shirt web company. You have the resource server, which is Twitter in this case, and you need to have these two servers strongly authenticate to provide good security. Guess what OAuth says about how to pull that off, how to do that? It basically says this: good luck, good luck, hope it's strong. They give you a few framework ideas to pull it off, but as we're going to see, the standard says this is something you need to figure out on your own. And in fact, anytime something in OAuth 2 gets difficult from security, guess what the framework says? Good luck. Not my job, that's your job, right? That's why you get paid the big bucks. Client identifier, this is a unique client ID you give to every client. And so if you're doing, and this isn't for every workflow, if you use this for the authorization code workflow, the one I'm describing now, then every single website or every single client has a separate ID. If you're providing like a client, like the Twitter application, then the client ID will be the same for every client. So for the most part, you want to have a different client ID for every single client. And last, we have bearer tokens. The whole OAuth 2 protocol is based on bearer tokens, which means if I steal this token and I give this token to the server is super happy. It's not attached to any server. It's not attached to any form of cryptography. It's independently going to provide this access by itself. This makes it easily stolen. It makes it easily replayed. There's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that will happen because of the weakness of bearer tokens. It's something that most people are moving away from in the world of secure protocols, but it's something that OAuth standardizes on, shamefully. So let's look at this. Let's talk about the OAuth threat model let's talk about the OAuth threat model, which was published RFC 6819 a couple years ago in 2003. So once they pushed out OAuth II, it was so incredibly weak and problematic, they had to build an entire RFC, request for comment standard, just to discuss the problems. And the OAuth II, guess what's longer, the OAuth II standard or the OAuth II threat model RFC? The RFC is longer than the standard itself. Yeah, that's where we are. So here's some of the guys. So different developers will build different parts of this architecture. If you're you're either an authorization server developer, that'd be like a Google or Twitter employee building their authorization server. You have client developers. That's people like the developers at the Hawaiian website who are implementing OAuth to talk to one of these major servers. Yeah, so number one, TLS everywhere. That way you know you're talking to the right server. Authenticity, that way you know you're not being sniffed. Confidentiality, and no one can modify your payload. Integrity. You get one tiny thing wrong in TLS, and this whole solution is done. And that's a problem because TLS has been under fire for years. There are tons of mistakes in TLS. It requires a huge amount of extra work to get TLS right, unfortunately, right? Let's look at some of the published issues around OAuth 2. So authorization servers should not automatically process repeat authorizations to public clients, and unless the clients validate it using a pre-registered redirect URI. So you need to do good validation at the authorization server, because I mean, there's a lot of redirecting. The whole framework works by redirecting the user back and forth, doing standard web redirects. So when I'm the client, I'm like the Hawaiian t-shirt company, and I make a request to the authorization server. I'm going to give it a URL. I'm going to give it a URL as a parameter. So when you're done logging into Twitter, it knows where to redirect back. Now, what if the attacker can influence that variable in some way? We have different attacks that let the attacker force you to redirect to a place that they never intended to, leaking tokens along the way. Next, authorization servers can mitigate the risk associated with automatic processing by limiting the scope of access tokens. When you provide an access token to a client, it's not like a session ID. And a lot of people do this, and it's wrong. It's supposed to be access to a specific feature only. Like, I'm going to let you tweet on my behalf, but you may not change my password, administer my account, accept certain friends, reject certain. You're only allowed to tweet on my behalf. This is why it's similar to access control, but it's not access control by itself. You would not use OAuth to replace role-based access control or a capability system. You wouldn't do that. Also, explain the scope to the user. Now, this is something you have to be a responsible developer when building an authorization server. When the client redirects to your Twitter service or whatnot, you need to tell the user, you're about to give permission to the Hawaiian t-shirt company to tweet on your behalf. Are you sure this is okay? So if the authorization server isn't very clear about what access is being provided, then the user may say okay without knowing what access they're giving up. So we have to be very clear in our communication when we're building an authorization server. And also, the scope should be as narrow as possible as well. This is just principle of least privilege as well. That's good enough for now. So again, let's look at these 4 grant types. By the way, everybody, can you feel the excitement in the air? Not really? All right, all right. This seems a little bit like work, I know. It's difficult to talk on this topic Because it's crazy complex. Doesn't need to be, but it is. Let's keep going, though. Okay. So look at the OAuth II grant types. First of all, you can hide, the whole purpose of the main grant type of OAuth is the authorization code grant. This is 99% of all OAuth implementations use this specific workflow here, right? And again, the purpose is that I, as a user, will never see an access token. And if I, as a user, get my hands on an access token and give it to the server directly, the server should reject it because I'm not an approved client in any way. And so this is a way for me to, again, log into Twitter, let the Hawaiian t-shirt have access to tweet in my behalf without exposing my password and without making requests to the authorization server directly. It would go through, it would go server to server, not user to server. The other kind of code grant is called the implicit workflow. This is the opposite. This happens when you never want a server to see an access token. This happens when this happens when you log into Twitter. Now you want to make a purchase through Twitter. They redirect you to PayPal. You log into PayPal, and PayPal puts the access token in JavaScript in a variable, redirects you back to Twitter, and now Twitter can read that variable through JavaScript to get access to this token. It's implicit because it's not server-to-server communication. It's only user-to-server authentication, so we never expose PayPal's token directly to the server. It goes through me as the user, and it's very temporary. We also have the password grant. That's like a Twitter thick client. And we have the client credentials. That's when you want to grab data that's not specific to any user. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So let's look at the code grant type. Here we go. There we go. This is the exact image from the OAuth Core 2.0 standard. This is the whole workflow, and you can see in more detail now how this framework works. The resource owner, that's the user in play. The user agent, that's the browser in play, usually. The client, that's going to be the Hawaiian t-shirt company. And the authorization server, in this case, it's Twitter. Right? And so I'll go over it one more time, and we'll move on. With the resource owner, through the browser, logs in to the client. They log into the Hawaiian t-shirt company. They make a purchase. They buy a bunch of Hawaiian t-shirts. You know, right on. They say that genius people like to wear only one kind of clothing, right? My entire wardrobe is this pair of shoes, a bunch of slacks, and a bunch of Hawaiian t-shirts. Those are the only clothes I own, and I am not a genius. I'm stupid, actually. So, but that's a different point. Let's move back to here. So, yes, we're at the client. We've logged to the client. We have purchased a bunch of Hawaiian t-shirts. Everything is great. Now we want to automatically tweet at certain parts of the e-commerce workflow. So we're going to say, here's my Twitter ID. We get redirected to the authorization server. We log into Twitter. We get redirected back to the client. And now the access token is stored in the client where it's allowed to communicate back and forth to the server so the server can tweet on my behalf. Let me charge on. And so, the user credentials are never exposed to the Twitter credentials are never exposed to the Hawaiian t-shirt company. The user never has access to the actual token. The client can use the access token even when the user is not present or logged in, and the refresh tokens will let you store a token that doesn't provide access in case it's stolen out of the database or something similar. And so these are the different variables you'll see in an OAuth request. The response type, that's determining which kind of flow it is. The client ID, it should be a unique identifier for every client. The scope is providing a certain layer of access, and the redirection URI is where the resource server should redirect back to after login is complete. So here's the different threat modeling issues around the authorization code grant. So we have 4411. This is all published, and actually the threat model was really well done. I just wish the standard was well done and not the threat model being well done, right? These are security guys who are like, yeah, we'll just whip the standard together quickly, then we can do threat modeling. That's so much fun. Okay, anyways. So here's the difference. When you're doing an authorization code grant like we've described today, these are some of the major things that you as a developer have to care about. 4411, threat of eavesdropping of the different token through refer headers, through logs, through open redirect issues, through browser history problems. The token's going to leak in all of these different situations. So we want to use TLS for everything. We have to provide strong authentication between the client and the server as well, right? Okay, there we go. So use TLS, strong authentication between the client and the server, and there's a lot of add-on protocols that have provided additional cryptographic extensions to OAuth. We want our access tokens to be incredibly short-lived, like just a couple minutes. So if they are stolen, their value is very minimal. We should only allow one use per token to stop replay attacks. Consider revoking clients sending you lots of bad codes on the fly. Reduce the scope of tokens to be as minimal as possible and flush the browser cache to deal with tokens being leaked that way as well. That's all stuff that you have to figure out on your own when building an authorization server on your own. And I am just getting started. There's actually like 3 pages of things that you have to deal with in the standard by yourself that the standard does not address in a detailed way. That is fucked up. And it makes this it makes it so problematic for anybody but a giant company with tons of resources. That's again why Aaron Hammer quit. He saw the writing on the wall of where this would go to. 4412, obtaining authorization codes from the server database directly. So parameterize your freaking queries, right? We've known this for a long time. If you have developers in your company who are still writing SQL injection vulnerabilities in 2015, man, go get a new job. That's nuts. We had this fixed about 10 years ago. And one SQL injection vulnerability, that's game over for your company. I'm now going to steal your whole database using a children's tool like SQL Map or similar, right? And also, store access tokens with a one-way methodology like hashing or adaptive hashing. And you have to have good database security, principal of least privilege, all that good stuff. 4413, online guessing of an authorization code. Your codes need to be incredibly high entropy, and the standard doesn't address this. They say you have to figure it out. Strong client authentication. The standard does not address this. Figure it out on your own. Short expiration time of tokens. How to implement proper expiration, figure it out on your own. Well, there's other add-on RFCs to help you now, but 4415, phishing. Yeah, standard phishing defense. One phishing attack, it's game over. You're done. So watch out for that. So let's look at the different, a couple other attacks. We're going to wrap up in just a moment, folks. One of the big problems we see is that OAuth is incredibly vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. Now, the standard actually does address this. You need to have some kind of state token, just like a synchronizer token in normal web apps. The user logs in, you give them a large random token, they go to the authorization server, it verifies that token, and this random token needs to be required in all requests per session to ensure that it's not a predictable request that was cross-site request forgery. And if you don't know what cross-site request forgery is, I'm going to talk about it later today in a workshop, right? I'm running out of time. I'm going to move ahead a little quickly here. So again, these slides will be published. This is a very common scenario. It's just a way for an attacker to set up a request on their web server, different than the other web servers, and if the user visits that server, if they're logged into Twitter and logged into the Hawaiian T-shirt company, then a third-party site that you're visiting can remote control the entire OAuth lifecycle and cause you to accept certain workflows that you never even meant to accept. This is a really well-known attack scenario. You as a developer need to add the state parameter to solve this problem, which is basically just a CSRF token. And again, the standard does not fully address how to do this correctly. There's additional work that needs to be done by the developer. So we also see the code flow open redirector attack. This is when the victim goes through a workflow using a provider site for authorization. The redirect URI is set to an evil URI, so when the whole OAuth workflow is done, they redirect back to the attacker's website and leak the token to an attacker's website, compromising this entire workflow. So on the server, you need to strongly whitelist what URLs are good. And how to do this is up to you, because you building a regular expression to validate a URL, that seems like an easy thing, but it's really not. So we see a lot of developers who have used like a simple regex off the internet and modified it a bit, and it ends up being a lot weaker than they anticipate. So it's not that hard to do, but it's something that the developer needs to figure out on their own. And they usually go, how do I whitelist a URL? They Google, grab some code, and slap it up, and it's not as strong as it needs to be. The other problems are access token being stolen. This is the problem. It's like the Eye of Mordor, one token to rule them all. These are just bearer tokens. It's not real crypto. Someone steals the token out of your database or over the network or guesses token values, they're in. And so, again, the problem, this is with the implicit flow primarily because it's going to be hidden in JavaScript. But we have the access token reuse as well, by just attacking the authorization server directly or attacking the client directly. Most authorization servers are built very strongly. Twitter and Google are under attack 24/7. They've learned by fire how to lock themselves down. But guess what? Guess how secure Jim's Hawaiian T-shirt company? I mean that metaphorically. How strong are the clients at storing tokens? Overall, they're not good. They don't have a dozen PhDs like Google does. So again, this token theft is a big problem. That's why we need to have one-use tokens, store the tokens as hashes or one-way methodologies, make sure the tokens are over TLS, and make sure the tokens make sure your client server and your authorization server has very strong authentication. And guess what the protocol says about how to do this? Good luck, right? And so, yeah, and let's wrap it up and answer questions. So OAuth II summary. Number one, holy crap, this is crazy. There's a lot of work, and I haven't even begun to address this. I am scratching the surface how to deal with this. This is crazy. It takes massive effort to build secure OAuth II authorization servers. It's an incredible resource to pull this off. A lot of the big players, though, have done this successfully because they have teams of PhDs to throw at the problem. The core standard itself of OAuth II, it barely addresses security at all. Major providers with PhDs to spare are overall doing a good job, though. We haven't seen many attacks against this that were successful. And the clients are at risk because they're likely to build less secure implementations, so buckle up. Read the threat model several times and follow its many recommendations. Again, this is the OAuth II RFC threat model. It's actually incredibly well written, and it will give you the proper guidance to build a secure solution. It's going to take time. It's going to be a lot of work, and the likeliness of doing it secure is low unless you follow all of these best practices and more. We talked about OAuth. We talked about CSRF. We talked about redirection. We looked at token reuse problems. We looked at the major grant type of the authorization code workflow. We kind of just scratched the surface. If you have any questions, please drop me a line. I hope this helped your cause in some way. Thank you very much, everyone.